Daniel is spending my money like it's water. He spent $10,000 on 2 yams, and I still have to buy goat. I feel like we were ripped off. I don't think Daniel's a good negotiator.
Forgiveness was not offered to Lisa like grace or love or even basic human decency. It was handed to her like an invoice. And the ugliest part was this. Even if she paid every last demand, brought every item, followed every rule, and sat through every humiliation, she still was not promised acceptance in the end, which raises the question nobody in that scene seems eager to answer. Why is she fighting this hard to stay inside a relationship that keeps shrinking her piece by piece? This is where the story stops looking like romance and starts looking like a test she never agreed to take, because every step forward seems to cost her money, dignity, and peace, while Daniel somehow stays calm in the middle of all of it. Almost too calm, as if the pressure is landing on her, exactly where it was always meant to land. And that is where the first crack opens up. Is this a cultural process she does not understand? Or is it a system where confusion helps other people stay in control? Is this love asking for patience, or guilt being turned into payment? And why does Lisa keep reading punishment as progress, as if each new demand proves she is getting closer to Daniel, when from the outside it looks like she is getting pulled deeper into something far more expensive than love? The list alone sounds less like healing and more like a toll booth, yams, a goat, cash, and no clear finish line, no reassurance, no sign that anybody is trying to make this easier for her, only the growing message that if she wants to keep this man, she has to keep proving herself in ways that never seem to end. And still she goes, still she follows, still she hopes. That hope is what makes this hard to watch, because hope is the one thing keeping her moving when common sense is already waving a red flag. So when they head to the market, the question is no longer whether this is strange. The question is who this process is serving. The shopping list is where this whole situation stops pretending to be simple and starts showing its real shape. Because nothing says healthy relationship repair like being told to bring 2 yams, 1 female goat, and a pile of cash with no clear answer on how much will be enough or when the requests will finally stop. And Lisa knows it sounds ridiculous because she is reacting like someone who feels the ground moving under her feet. She is irritated, suspicious, and visibly stressed about money. But she still keeps going, which is exactly why this scene matters more than people think. Because this is not random market business anymore, this is the first stage where resistance starts getting replaced by participation. And once that shift happens, every next step gets easier to sell. That is why her annoyance matters. She is not walking through this market smiling like she trusts the process. She is complaining, side-eyeing the prices, worrying about being ripped off, and watching Daniel spend her money in a way that makes her even more uneasy. And still, she follows the list. That contradiction tells you everything. Part of her knows this feels off, but a stronger part is still clinging to the idea that maybe one more purchase gets her closer to peace, closer to marriage, closer to not losing Daniel. That is how people end up agreeing to things they would have laughed at an hour earlier. Not because the logic improves, but because the fear gets louder. And Daniel, meanwhile, stays steady in a way that invites 2 readings. Maybe he truly believes this is the path and sees no reason to question any of it. Or maybe staying calm is easy when the cost is landing in somebody else's lap. Either way, he is not the one spiraling in that market. Lisa is. By the time the goat is finally bought, the absurdity has stopped being funny and started feeling expensive, because now the animal is secured, the cash is thinner, the priest is still waiting, and Lisa is left staring at the one question she has been trying not to ask. What happens if she has already spent too much before the real price even begins? By this point, the money is not the real story anymore, because people do not keep draining themselves over yams and goats unless something deeper is sitting underneath the bill, and with Lisa, that deeper thing looks painfully obvious. Losing cash hurts, but losing Daniel seems to scare her more, which is why she keeps moving even while every new demand makes her more uneasy, more frustrated, and more aware that this relationship keeps asking for proof from her while giving almost no emotional safety back. That is where the whole thing starts to feel less like a ritual and more like a trap built out of investment, because she has already poured too much into this to admit the return may be rotten. She has spent time, hope, travel, money, and public emotion on this man, and once a person has invested that much, walking away does not feel like a clean decision. It feels like standing in front of your own choices and admitting they led you somewhere humiliating. That is the part people avoid. Not the financial hit on its own, but the emotional shame of saying, I did all this, I bent this far, I paid this much, I kept believing, and none of it bought me peace. None of it made me safer. None of it turned uncertainty into trust. So instead of stopping, a person often does the opposite. They double down. They tell themselves one more step will make the earlier steps worth it. One more payment. One more sacrifice. One more ceremony. One more chance to finally get the reward they thought they were building toward from the start. That is why Lisa keeps going, even when the warning signs are no longer subtle. She is not acting like someone who feels secure. She is acting like someone who thinks quitting now would hurt more than continuing. And that mindset is dangerous, because it makes almost any demand feel survivable as long as it holds out the promise of not losing everything at once. So when she starts heading toward the priest, the fear is already there, the money stress is already there, and the worst part is, she no longer sounds like someone making a free choice. She sounds like someone who believes she has gone too far to turn back. The second Lisa steps into that space, the mood changes from awkward to threatening, because nothing about this setup feels designed to calm her down or help her understand what is happening. It feels designed to throw her off balance before the ritual even begins, and you can see it all over her. She is not centered. She is not confident. She is not speaking like someone who knows where this is going. She looks like someone trying to keep herself together while every detail around her keeps pushing the message that she is the outsider, she is the one in trouble, and she is the one who needs to submit if she wants any hope of getting out of this with Daniel still beside her. That imbalance is what makes the scene hit harder than the shopping trip ever could, because a market is annoying, but this feels bigger. The silence matters. The shouting matters. The command to be quiet matters. Before Lisa gets comfort, she gets atmosphere. Before she gets clarity, she gets fear. And once fear enters the room first, everything that follows starts looking different. A person who is frightened and confused is not weighing choices in some calm, free, rational way. A person in that state is trying to survive the moment, avoid making things worse, and latch on to any instruction that sounds like a path out. That is what makes this scene so uncomfortable. Not because it is strange on television, but because it starts raising a much darker question. When somebody is already scared, already lost, and already desperate not to lose the relationship, how freely are they agreeing to anything at all? This is the point where the story stops feeling quirky and starts feeling coercive, because the authority figure owns the room, owns the tone, and owns the rules, while Lisa shrinks further into herself and waits to be told what comes next. And then the ritual energy gets stranger, louder, and harder to read, and you can feel the realization starting to hit her all at once. She did not walk into a simple blessing. She walked into something far more intense than she expected. At this stage, the ritual stops framing Lisa like someone trying to build a future and starts framing her like the stain standing in the way of it. And that shift is what makes the whole thing feel so harsh, because once the blame gets placed on her this openly, she is no longer being guided into a family. She is being presented as the problem the family needs removed, corrected, or purified before anything else moves forward. The show puts the priest's words on screen, and those words carry the accusation, but the part worth focusing on is the emotional effect, because you can see Lisa sitting there not like a loved partner being understood, but like a defendant being reduced into a list of offenses. And there is a huge difference between those two experiences. One offers belonging. The other offers shame with ceremony wrapped around it. That is why this part lands so hard. Her guilt is no longer private. It is not even casual. It becomes public, formal, and tied to authority, which makes the humiliation heavier, because now the message is not only that she has done wrong, but that her wrongness needs witness, process, and payment before she earns the right to move forward. That kind of setup puts a person in a brutal position. If Lisa pushes back, she risks looking defiant in a room where she already has the least power. If she stays quiet, she helps the whole thing move forward as if the accusations have already been accepted. Either way, she loses ground. A fair reading would admit some viewers might see this as part of a belief system she does not understand, and that is true enough to acknowledge, but the emotional reality on screen still looks ugly, because whatever the stated purpose may be, the experience for Lisa feels like public reduction. She is not being welcomed toward love. She is being told she must first be cleaned of herself, and right when that humiliation settles in, the next demand arrives. More cash, more offering, more proof, and suddenly forgiveness no longer looks spiritual at all. It looks like a bill. Now the whole thing becomes impossible to sugarcoat, because the ritual does not move on trust, comfort, or reconciliation. It moves when money moves, and once cash starts changing hands in a scene like this, the story takes on a colder shape, because love no longer feels like a bond between two people trying to fix something. It starts looking like a toll road where Lisa keeps paying at each checkpoint and still never gets told the final destination with any clarity. The gifts are handed over, the cash is handed over, and only then does the process keep going, which tells you more than any speech could. Payment is not some side detail here. Payment is the engine. That also forces a harder look at Daniel, because he is not off to the side like some confused tourist caught in the moment. He is part of the structure Lisa is trying to satisfy, part of the reason she is willing to keep swallowing all of this, and part of the reason every demand carries emotional weight. A fair reading would leave room for two possibilities. Maybe he believes in this process and sees it as necessary. Maybe he also benefits from never questioning a system that keeps pushing Lisa to prove herself while he waits for the result. Those two readings are not even mutually exclusive, which is where the story gets uglier, because a person can believe something and still benefit from how it pressures somebody else, and the strongest receipt is not even hidden. The closer this ritual gets to clearing the path to marriage, the warmer Daniel seems to become. That shift matters. His energy softens as the obstacle starts disappearing, and whether that comes from faith, relief, self-interest, or some blend of all three, Lisa is still the one funding the emotional weather in the room. Then, the ritual takes another turn. The money part gives way to something even heavier. Statues appear. Promises begin. And suddenly, this is not only about what she must pay. It is about what she must pledge. This is where the whole situation stops looking like a chaotic relationship and starts looking like a contract written in fear. Because once Lisa is pushed into making a vow, the issue is no longer whether this family accepts her for now. The issue becomes whether she is being locked into a version of love where obedience gets treated like devotion and any future mistake gets framed like a spiritual offense instead of a normal human problem. And that is why this moment hits harder than the cash ever did. Money hurts, sure, but money leaves the hand once. A vow reaches forward. A vow follows you out of the room. A vow changes the meaning of what comes next. Because now, Lisa is not only giving offerings to smooth over the past, she is being told how her future must look, who she must belong to, and what sort of danger hangs over her if she ever breaks from the path laid out in front of her. That is why the emotional tone here should not be mistaken for romance, because nothing about this feels soft, mutual, or freely chosen in the way love is supposed to feel when two people are building trust. This feels like pressure wearing sacred clothing. It feels like destiny being used as leverage. Lisa is handed something bigger than a promise between partners. She is handed a rule, and the rule comes with consequences. Stay in line. Stay loyal. Stay inside the approved shape of this relationship. And once that idea gets planted, the earlier gifts start looking smaller by comparison. The yams, the goat, the cash, all of that set the stage, but the vow is the real turning point, because the earlier demands emptied her wallet while this one reaches into her sense of agency and starts narrowing what she believes she is allowed to do next. Then comes the final twist of the knife, because the warning is no longer about cleansing the past. Now it is about what happens if she misbehaves again, and with that one move, the ritual changes form. It stops feeling like forgiveness and starts feeling like threat management. Now the scene starts pretending to offer peace, and that is what makes it more disturbing. Because on the surface, the hardest part seems over. The ritual is nearing its end. The goat has served its purpose. The final instructions are being given. Lisa is told how to leave, how to move, how to carry herself out of the space, and then comes the line she has been paying, fearing, and shrinking herself to hear: she is clean. On paper, that sounds like closure. On screen, it feels more complicated because the relief arrives before any serious question gets answered. What changed here besides Lisa becoming more compliant, more frightened of stepping wrong, more willing to accept the rules being handed to her as the cost of keeping Daniel? Not much. And that is the problem sitting underneath this whole moment like a trap door. Nothing in the relationship's deeper structure looks repaired. The trust issues are not repaired. The imbalance is not repaired. The pattern where Lisa must prove, pay, and submit while other people decide whether she is acceptable is not repaired. All that has changed is that she has now passed through a ritual that tells her the barrier is gone, and because she is exhausted, emotional, and desperate for this nightmare to mean something, the declaration lands on her like a rescue. You can feel her grabbing onto it. After all the confusion, fear, accusation, and pressure, the word clean sounds like air. The backward walk, the final instruction, the release from the room, all of it creates the impression that order has been restored. But restored for whom? That is why the scene has to be read in 2 layers at once. On the surface, Lisa looks lighter. Underneath, the terms of acceptance have only become clearer, and those terms were never gentle. So when she starts to feel relief, the audience should feel uneasy, because relief after pressure does not always mean healing. Sometimes it means the pressure worked. And right on cue, Daniel's energy begins to soften. His warmth returns, and that shift is hard to ignore. Because the second the path to marriage looks safe again, so does his affection. Lisa comes out of this looking lighter, and that is where the scene gets crueler, not softer. Because her relief does not calm the audience, it should unsettle them, since from her point of view, the ritual fixed the problem, the path is open again, Daniel is affectionate again, the future feels possible again. But from the outside, the stronger reading is much darker. The ritual did not restore peace, it restored access. It restored Daniel's route back to the version of the relationship he wanted, and the timing of his warmth is what makes the whole thing sting. He does not suddenly become tender in the middle of her confusion, or during the humiliation, or while she is being pressured into proving herself. He gets warmer once the barrier to marriage is removed, and once you notice that pattern, it is hard to unsee. To be fair, some viewers will watch this and call it closure. They will say the process is over, the family objection is settled, the ritual has done its job, and now both people are free to move on. Fine, that reading exists. But the receipts on screen keep pushing in another direction. The money was not random. The fear was not random. The vow was not random. Every major step demanded more from Lisa before acceptance showed up. And that sequence matters, because acceptance that arrives after compliance does not feel unconditional, it feels earned under pressure. That is not the same thing as emotional safety. That is approval with terms attached. And this is why the ending lands with such ugly irony. Lisa feels better because she thinks the ordeal proved her commitment and secured her place. The audience feels worse because the ordeal proved how much she was willing to endure for the chance to be reapproved. The same woman who walked in being told forgiveness had a price is now walking out grateful she could afford the bill. The goat mattered because it turned emotion into transaction. The cash mattered because nothing moved until payment moved. The vow mattered because the ritual was never only trying to clean up the past, it was trying to control the future. And Daniel's warmth at the end mattered because it exposed the pattern in one glance. Acceptance only seemed to settle in once Lisa had paid enough, endured enough, promised enough, and made herself small enough for the system around him to feel satisfied. That is the full circle of this story. What looked on the surface like forgiveness was, in practice, a long test of how much discomfort Lisa would absorb before she was allowed to feel chosen again. And the darkest part is that she walks away relieved, not because the relationship suddenly became safe, but because she no longer has to sit inside the fear of immediate rejection. For someone in her position, that relief is seductive. It can feel close enough to peace that you stop asking whether peace was ever what you got. That is why the ending should not be played like a simple gotcha against Daniel or a simple pity piece for Lisa. He has complexity. Belief, self-interest, family pressure, and ambition all seem tangled together in ways that keep him from looking flat. But complexity does not erase pattern, and the pattern is hard to ignore. His softer energy rises when the path to marriage opens back up. Lisa also deserves empathy without being turned into a helpless passenger in her own story. She makes choices. She stays. She pays. She agrees. But those choices happen under pressure, under fear, and under the weight of everything she has already invested, which is why the ending lands with both sadness and frustration at the same time. So when you pull every loop tight, the answer is ugly but clear. Lisa did not mistake chaos for love by accident. She mistook compliance for safety because facing the alternative would mean admitting the fantasy cost her more than money. It cost her judgment, dignity, and the ability to tell the difference between being reapproved and being loved. And once a person crosses that line, the next chapter is never about whether the ceremony worked. It is about what damage starts after somebody thinks survival inside the relationship counts as proof of love.